Let's talk about Elden Ring here,
Mhm.
which I have done the performance capture on, but I think we should probably put a big stamp on it saying something like compromised capture. Here's the thing, right? Whenever we do a performance capture from our own sources, right, we know that it's a good feed. This doesn't look like a good feed. The first impressions are really poor. It looks juddery and bad. And yet, for the most part, it seems to be running at 30 frames per second. There are some dips in there, as you'll see with the video that's running here. But for the most part, it does seem to be 30 FPS. But I think it is running unlocked. And I think that From Software or whoever has decimated the capture down from a 60 FPS capture to a 30 FPS one that has then been reinserted into a 60 FPS container. Because what's happening here is that the camera movement is completely balked. It's super, super choppy. It's not looking great, is it? Yes, so that is odd. But the pixel count, which is quite impressive, is coming in at 1920 by 1080. Elden Ring Tarnished Edition. Well,
Tarnished
the
edition.
asset is certainly tarnished. But Oliver, I was thinking about this. When we were running Elden Ring on the Steam Deck, 800p was doable, but kind of inconsistent in terms of performance. But this seems to
Mhm.
be running, you know, certainly in terms of raw metrics, not bad. And with that 1080p resolution.
Yeah, although the manner in which it's been presented here is certainly a little bit bizarre. And like every other Switch 2 title here, the image quality is not perfect by any means, even though it is running at a pretty decent resolution for a Switch 2 title. I
Yep.
think that we'd really have to take a look at this in some more detail, and perhaps we can, just to compare it to other console versions that are extant of this particular title. I
Yep.
do see some popping and possibly a few other compromises here, but overall it looks like a pretty decent looking version of Elden Ring
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
Switch 2, assuming whatever frame pacing oddity has been introduced, presumably in the capture process, is not present in that final title.
Yeah. Let's talk Cyberpunk 2077, which is again a kind of barometer title for the capabilities of the system. And I actually think that what we're seeing here is pretty impressive. Tom's done the pixel counts here. And I actually think, well, he's got a 540p pixel count here, but that seems to be on the market area shot. And that seems to be a transition point into
Hmm.
handheld play. So I'm kind of wondering if that 540p is exclusively handheld, but other metrics are coming in at 720p, 792p with a 1080p max. And as you can see from the footage here, running at 30 or capped at 30 frames per second, decent frame pacing, but there can be some dips. But it looks pretty
I
good, I thought, John.
I agree. I think it looks really good considering it's the image quality is not as bad as the numbers would suggest. It's clean enough. It's certainly light years beyond the last generation PS4, Xbox One version, which by the way, it also includes the DLC, which is
Yeah.
excellent. But it's also notable because that did not ship on PS4 and Xbox One, if I recall.
Yes, you're
Right?
quite right.
So
Hmm.
that suggests that they're at a level of performance where they're able to pull it off because I think they cited, issues with that. And those versions always had performance issues. Based on what we're seeing here, at least, there's at least a good chance that it will run significantly better than those versions, albeit it's 30 FPS, and also look better. So it does feel like it's perhaps it should be good, I would say. I'm excited to see what they can do with it because it is always sort of a nice benchmark. We're not going to get any of the ray tracing features, I assume, though not confirmed one way or the other, but it's very unlikely. But I am still disappointed that we're likely not seeing DLSS here. Like it's hard to tell from footage necessarily, but
Mm.
I'm not seeing anything that strikes me as like DLSS like necessarily.
Yeah. Hmm.
Which
One
this
thing
feels
I
like it would have been a
want to
good title for it.
One thing I want to quickly point out about all of the performance footage here is that it is captured from an edit. And when there's an edit point, you might see a 16 millisecond spike.
Right.
That's simply because of the 30 FPS cadence wasn't cut cleanly, so to speak. So you have two unique frames next to each other.
Yep.
But thoughts about this, Oliver?
No, I think this looks pretty good. And like John said, it does look markedly better than the last gen versions, especially those last gen versions around the time of release when they were pretty pretty abysmal, I would have to say. But yeah, this does look like a pretty feature complete, good looking version of Cyberpunk. We get the screen space reflections in there, we get dense crowds. You know, it looks like Cyberpunk, recognizably like Cyberpunk, in a way that, you know, there are bigger compromises that we're used to seeing from Switch ports. And I think what we're seeing from Switch 2 is these kind of PS4 caliber, last gen caliber titles, potentially in terms of their visuals, or even some current generation titles in terms of their visuals, can be delivered pretty credibly on the Switch 2.
Yeah. Next up, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Intergrade. Again, we got some performance capture here. Unevenly frame-paced 30 frames per second, as we would kind of expect possibly from Unreal Engine 4, but disappointing, I think. You wouldn't expect it in a console game, really.
Well,
they're
so
usually okay.
That's the thing, is Final Fantasy VII in its original form on PS4 and the quality mode on PS5 was a properly paced 30 FPS, right? So Square did figure it out. They had it working, which makes me wonder, is there a problem with this version, or is it just a problem with the capture and the way they inserted it into the edit?
Right.
That's what we
Tom's
don't know.
done the pixel count here, and it's native 1080p on every single shot he tested. Pretty impressive, I'd say, Oliver.
Yeah, this looks really good. I mean, again, this is just at a glance. We're going to have to take a closer look at this one possibly, but this does look very, very similar to the PlayStation 4 version, I'd say.
It does.
In terms of its overall appearance, in terms of the resolution, in terms of, like, you know, they're keeping all the particle effects in there. It looks very comparable in a lot of respects. Shadow maps are still present, you know, no glaring downgrades, but I'd say this one maintains some of the legacy of Crisis Core on the Switch in terms of having a poorly frame-paced 30 FPS, because that was another Unreal Engine title, another questionably frame-paced 30 FPS title on the Switch. Hopefully they can clean that up before launch. Hopefully that isn't just some endemic issue to Square's use of the engine here, because this looks pretty tremendous. I mean, I gotta say, I'm really impressed with this one.